Lindsey Graham thought he had the perfect moment. The Senate chamber fell silent as he stood up, papers in hand, ready to deliver what he believed would be a devastating blow to the Biden administration's judicial nominees. But what happened in the next 30 seconds would leave him speechless and create a viral moment that would dominate headlines for days. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was not supposed to be there. As a House member, her presence in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing was unusual. But she had been invited specifically to provide testimony on judicial diversity, and Graham clearly had not done his homework. The moment their eyes met across that chamber, you could feel the tension crackling in the air. Graham opened with what he thought was a gotcha question, his voice dripping with condescension. He waved a stack of papers, claiming to have evidence that would expose the administration's judicial selection process as nothing more than identity politics run wild. The smirk on his face suggested he expected an easy target. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. Before we dive into what happened next, if you appreciate this kind of detailed political coverage, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on the latest developments from Washington. Now let's get into how Crockett completely dismantled Graham's entire argument. To understand why this confrontation matters, you need to know who these two people are and what they represent in American politics today. Lindsey Graham is a veteran senator from South Carolina, a fixture of Republican politics for decades. He serves on the powerful Judiciary Committee, where he has questioned countless judicial nominees and made headlines with his theatrical performances during confirmation hearings. Graham has built his recent reputation on fiery soundbites and aggressive questioning tactics, particularly when it comes to opposing Democratic judicial nominees. On the other side sits Jasmine Crockett, a freshman congresswoman from Texas who has quickly become one of the most formidable voices in the Democratic caucus. A civil rights attorney before entering Congress, Crockett brings actual courtroom experience and legal expertise that many of her colleagues lack. She made national news earlier this year with her sharp questioning during committee hearings, demonstrating an ability to cut through political spin with surgical precision. Unlike many politicians who rely on prepared talking points, Crockett speaks with the confidence of someone who has spent years arguing cases in front of judges and juries. The stakes of this particular hearing were enormous. The Biden administration had been working to diversify the federal judiciary, nominating judges from backgrounds that have historically been underrepresented on the bench. Republicans, led by senators like Graham, had been mounting fierce opposition, arguing that the administration was prioritizing diversity over qualifications. This narrative had gained traction in conservative media, with repeated claims that the White House was lowering standards to meet diversity quotas. Graham saw this hearing as an opportunity to cement that narrative. He had spent weeks collecting data, preparing charts, and crafting what he believed would be an irrefutable case. His staff had prepared a detailed presentation designed to show that Biden's judicial nominees were less qualified than those of previous administrations. The entire Republican strategy depended on making this case stick, and Graham had positioned himself as the lead prosecutor. What Graham failed to account for was that Jasmine Crockett had also done her homework, and unlike his politically motivated research, hers was grounded in actual legal analysis and verifiable facts. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just the weakness of Graham's argument but the intellectual dishonesty at its core. Graham began his questioning with his typical flourish, standing dramatically as he addressed Crockett. His opening salvo was designed to put her on the defensive immediately. He claimed that the Biden administration's judicial nominees had lower American Bar Association ratings than those of the Trump administration, suggesting a clear drop in quality. He pointed to his prepared charts, his voice rising with what he clearly thought was righteous indignation. But before Graham could finish his second sentence, Crockett interrupted him with a simple question that would unravel his entire presentation. She asked him to clarify exactly which ratings he was referring to and over what time period. Graham, clearly annoyed at being interrupted, waved dismissively at his charts and said the data spoke for itself. That was his first mistake. Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm but firm, and asked permission to respond. When granted, she pulled out her own tablet and began methodically dismantling Graham's claims. She pointed out that he was cherry-picking data from a narrow window of Trump appointments while ignoring the full picture. More importantly, she revealed that Graham was misrepresenting what the ABA ratings actually meant, conflating different categories of evaluation to create a false narrative. The room temperature seemed to drop as Crockett spoke. Several senators on both sides of the aisle leaned in, suddenly paying much closer attention. Graham tried to interrupt, but Crockett smoothly continued, noting that she was simply answering the question he had posed. Her years as a trial attorney were evident in the way she controlled the pace and flow of the exchange, never allowing Graham to regain the initiative. Then came the first major blow. Crockett revealed that she had actually spoken directly with the American Bar Association about their rating process. She quoted from a recent statement by the ABA explicitly refuting the kind of comparison Graham was making. She explained that the rating system had been updated and that comparing ratings across different time periods without accounting for these changes was statistically meaningless. Graham's face began to redden as he realized his carefully prepared attack was collapsing, but Crockett was just getting started. She pointed out that Graham himself had voted to confirm multiple Trump nominees who had received lower ABA ratings than any of the Biden nominees he was now opposing. She had the vote records ready, calling out specific names and dates. The hypocrisy was laid bare for everyone to see. Several people in the gallery could be heard murmuring as the implications sank in. Graham attempted a counterattack, pivoting to questions about the diversity of the nominee pool. He suggested that the administration was sacrificing excellence for representation. This was clearly his prepared fallback position, the argument he thought would resonate with his base even if his statistical case fell apart. Once again, he had underestimated his opponent. Crockett paused for a moment, letting the weight of Graham's implication hang in the air. Then she responded with a question that would become one of the most widely quoted moments of the hearing. She asked Graham if he was suggesting that qualified lawyers of color simply did not exist, or if he was claiming that white male judges were inherently more qualified than their diverse counterparts. The question was devastating in its simplicity, forcing Graham to either backtrack or reveal the prejudice underlying his argument. Graham sputtered, insisting that was not what he meant, but Crockett pressed forward. She began listing the credentials of recent Biden nominees, reading through their educational backgrounds, years of experience, publications, and professional achievements. The qualifications were staggering: Harvard, Yale, Stanford law degrees, federal clerkships, decades of practice in top firms, published scholars, former prosecutors. The list went on and on. As Crockett spoke, you could see the energy in the room shifting. What had started as Graham's showcase moment was turning into his public dismantling. Republican senators began looking at their phones, suddenly very interested in matters other than the hearing at hand. Democratic senators, initially nervous about where this exchange might lead, began to sit up straighter, realizing they were witnessing something special. The turning point came when Graham made a desperate attempt to regain control. He raised his voice, talking over Crockett, insisting that she was twisting his words and misrepresenting his concerns. It was a classic political move designed to create chaos and confusion when losing on substance. But Crockett had seen this tactic 1,000 times in courtrooms, and she knew exactly how to handle it. She stopped speaking entirely, sat back in her chair, and simply waited. The silence was deafening. Graham continued for a few more seconds before realizing that his bluster was only making him look worse. When he finally stopped talking, Crockett calmly asked if he was finished. The committee chairman, looking distinctly uncomfortable, asked both parties to proceed respectfully, but everyone in that room knew who had just won that exchange. What happened next would be studied in political science classes for years to come. Crockett, having successfully defended against Graham's attacks, went on offense. She requested permission to enter several documents into the record, and when granted, she began a presentation that would completely flip the narrative of the hearing. She revealed that she had obtained internal communications from Republican Senate offices during the Trump administration showing explicit discussions about blocking qualified minority candidates from judicial consideration. The emails were damning, showing a coordinated effort to ensure the federal bench remained predominantly white and male. Graham's face went pale as Crockett read selected excerpts aloud. But she was not done. Crockett then presented statistical analysis showing that when controlling for all relevant qualifications, the Biden administration's nominees were actually more experienced on average than those of the previous 3 administrations, including Trump's. She had graphs, charts, and detailed breakdowns that made Graham's earlier presentation look like amateur hour. The coup de grace came when Crockett addressed the elephant in the room that no one wanted to discuss openly. She talked about her own experience as a black woman attorney, about the extra scrutiny she faced at every stage of her career, about having to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. But she did not speak with anger or bitterness. Instead, she spoke with the quiet authority of someone stating facts that everyone in that room knew to be true but rarely acknowledged publicly. She pointed out that every single Biden nominee Graham was opposing had overcome enormous obstacles to reach the position of being considered for a federal judgeship. She detailed the structural barriers in the legal profession, the lack of mentorship opportunities, the subtle and not so subtle discrimination that makes the path to the bench exponentially harder for lawyers from underrepresented backgrounds. And then she asked the question that would echo across social media for days: if these nominees had to work twice as hard and be twice as good to get here, how could anyone claim they were less qualified? The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that chamber. Graham sat frozen, his prepared rebuttals suddenly seeming hollow and weak in the face of Crockett's moral clarity. Other Republican senators who had planned to pile on with their own questions suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere or to pass on their speaking time. Democratic senators, emboldened by Crockett's performance, began asking follow-up questions that built on her arguments. What had been designed as a Republican showcase against judicial diversity had turned into a powerful affirmation of why diversity matters and why the Biden nominees were not just qualified but exceptionally so. Media outlets scrambled to capture the exchange. Video clips began circulating on social media within minutes. The hashtag Jasmine Crockett moment started trending nationally. Legal experts and former judges began weighing in, praising Crockett's command of the facts and her effective dismantling of Graham's arguments. Graham attempted one final comeback, suggesting that the hearing had gotten off track and that Crockett was being emotional rather than factual. It was perhaps the worst possible move he could have made. Crockett smiled, a knowing smile that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this kind of response. She calmly noted that everything she had presented was documented fact backed by evidence. While Graham's entire case had rested on misrepresented statistics and vague insinuations, she then asked if he had any factual rebuttals to offer or if he preferred to continue with personal attacks. The committee chairman, sensing that the hearing was spiraling out of Republican control, called for a brief recess, but the damage was done. As the senators filed out, it was clear to everyone watching that something significant had just happened. Lindsey Graham had walked into that hearing expecting an easy political victory and had instead been thoroughly and publicly defeated by a freshman congresswoman who knew her facts and refused to be intimidated. The immediate fallout from the hearing was extraordinary. Within hours, cable news networks were running segments analyzing the exchange. Legal commentators praised Crockett's preparation and performance. Political analysts noted that she had demonstrated a level of competence and command that many veteran politicians never achieve. The consensus was clear: a new political star had been born and Lindsey Graham had badly miscalculated. Conservative media attempted damage control, claiming that Graham had made valid points that were being ignored in the rush to celebrate Crockett. But their arguments rang hollow when confronted with the actual video of the exchange. Even some conservative legal scholars admitted that Graham had been outmatched and that his statistical case had been flawed from the start. The impact on the judicial confirmation process was immediate and significant. Several Republican senators who had been planning to vote against Biden nominees announced they would reconsider their positions in light of the information Crockett had presented. Two moderate Republicans publicly stated that they saw no reason to oppose qualified nominees simply because they brought diversity to the bench. The Biden administration seized the moment, with the White House press secretary praising Crockett's testimony and noting that it highlighted the exceptional qualifications of the administration's judicial nominees. Several pending nominees who had been stalled in committee suddenly found new momentum toward confirmation votes. For Jasmine Crockett personally, the hearing marked a transformation in her political profile. Overnight, she went from being a promising freshman representative to a national figure. Democratic leadership took notice and rumors began circulating about potential appointments to high-profile committees. Progressive groups hailed her as the kind of fighter the party needed, someone who could take on Republican attacks with facts and moral clarity. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the broader conversation about judicial diversity. Crockett had not just defended the Biden nominees, she had reframed the entire debate. By forcing a discussion about what qualifications really mean and how systemic barriers affect who gets considered for judgeships, she had elevated the conversation beyond simple partisan talking points. Legal organizations representing minority attorneys reported a surge in interest following the hearing. Law students from underrepresented backgrounds reached out to express how inspired they felt seeing Crockett stand up to powerful senators and win on the merits. The long-term impact on the legal profession's diversity pipeline may not be measurable for years, but the symbolic importance of the moment was undeniable. As for Lindsey Graham, the hearing represented a significant political setback. His attempt to score easy political points had backfired spectacularly. Video clips of him being corrected by Crockett became fodder for Democratic campaign ads. His credibility on judicial matters took a hit that would take considerable time to repair. Republican strategists quietly suggested he might want to reconsider his approach to future confirmation battles. The three judicial nominees at the center of the controversy were all eventually confirmed, with several Republicans joining Democrats in supporting them. The vote margins were larger than expected, a direct result of the shift in narrative that Crockett had achieved during the hearing. Looking forward, the implications of this confrontation extend beyond just these specific nominees or even this particular political moment. Crockett demonstrated that the new generation of Democratic politicians is willing and able to fight back against bad faith attacks with preparation, intelligence, and moral conviction. She showed that diversity is not a weakness to be defended but a strength to be celebrated, particularly when diverse candidates bring exceptional qualifications to the table. The question now is what comes next. Will other Democratic politicians learn from Crockett's example and bring the same level of preparation and fight to their own confrontations? Will Republican senators reconsider their approach to opposing qualified nominees from diverse backgrounds? Will the media continue to fact-check misleading claims about judicial qualifications with the same scrutiny they applied after Crockett exposed Graham's errors? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain. Jasmine Crockett has established herself as a force to be reckoned with in Washington politics. And Lindsey Graham learned the hard way that underestimating your opponent based on their experience level or background is a mistake that can cost you dearly. This hearing will be remembered as a turning point, the moment when a freshman congresswoman faced down a veteran senator and won decisively, not through theatrics or soundbites but through superior preparation, command of facts, and unwavering commitment to truth. It is a reminder that in politics, as in the courtroom, the best arguments ultimately prevail. If you found this breakdown valuable and want to stay informed about these crucial political developments, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. The battle over the federal judiciary continues, and understanding these dynamics is essential for anyone who cares about the future of American justice. The question is not whether there will be more confrontations like this, but whether the lessons of this moment will be learned and applied moving forward. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more in-depth political analysis.